Over the weekend, Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty on all charges, which by now is old news, so I don't want to go into that too much. What I do want to do is highlight some of the very best responses from Democrats and liberals on how they reacted to this verdict, because some of them are pretty crazy. Let's start with AOC. She says that what we're seeing is a system functioning as designed and protecting those it was designed for, specifically white men. That's where she's going with this. She says, "My heart still breaks for the communities and families whose grief now compounds, and the countless others who will be denied and deprived in similar scenes across the country." Once again saying that this is because of racial injustice, even though Kyle Rittenhouse and all the people he shot were in fact white. But this is a theme we're going to see pop up again and again. Now let's jump to President Biden. Initially, he said that he accepted the jury's decision. Shortly after, though, he put out this statement, in which he says that in response to the verdict in Kenosha, it will leave many Americans feeling angry and concerned, myself included. So Joe Biden is angry that an 18-year-old isn't going to be spending the majority of his life in prison just trying to defend himself. Now we have Kamala Harris, who says that today's verdict speaks for itself. "I've spent a majority of my career working to make our criminal justice system more equitable. It's clear there's still a lot more work to do." Now, I've looked at Kamala Harris's history and her career in the past, so I don't want to go into much depth here, but let me just highlight a few key points. First and foremost, that she kept people in prison longer than their sentences required so she could use them as free labor. She also threw a lot of people into prison for smoking marijuana or for minimal amounts of possession. She also tried to hold back evidence that could exonerate someone who was on death row because she didn't want it to go through. If that is the system of equity that she is fighting for, count me out. I want no part of that because that's not fair in any way. So yeah, what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse is fair and is just, which is the exact opposite of plenty of things that Kamala Harris has tried to do throughout her career. Elizabeth Warren says that there are two justice systems in America. It's time to dismantle systemic racism and fundamentally transform our broken justice system. Once again, this is an example of racism and white supremacy. Now, as clear as many of those have been, Cori Bush is much more clear in what she's saying. She says the judge, the jury, the defendant, it's white supremacy in action. So I guess all of them are guilty of white supremacy, not just Kyle Rittenhouse. So at least she's spreading the blame more evenly. The system isn't built to hold white supremacists accountable. It's why black and brown folks are brutalized and put in cages, while white supremacist murderers walk free. I'm hurt, angry, and heartbroken. So here, if I were Kyle Rittenhouse, I think he has a pretty good legal case against Cori Bush right here, because she very clearly calls him not only a white supremacist, but a murderer, even though he was found by a jury of his peers to not be a murderer. This is pretty clearly something that she shouldn't have said, and I think legal action could and should be brought against her, according to my limited understanding of the law. This is messed up. You don't get to go around calling people white supremacist murderers because you don't like a verdict that was brought against them. Especially not when you're a public official like this who's supposed to be serving the public. What's going on, Cori Bush? And now we have Bill de Blasio, who said that Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum are victims and they should be alive today, even though they, attacked Kyle before he ever attacked them. The only reason they're not is because a violent, dangerous man chose to take a gun across state lines and start shooting people. To call this a miscarriage of justice is an understatement. And his characterization of the events obviously shows he has no idea what he's talking about. But that's pretty common. When you look at these responses, you can tell who has been following the trial at all and who has just been reading the media headlines. This is a perfect example. We have Russ McLaughlin, who honestly, I don't care who he is, but he is verified on Twitter, and that's enough for me. He said, "The fix was in for Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Judge Bruce Schroeder did everything in his power to ensure the acquittal of a murderer." Once again, that sounds like slander to me. "A murderer who will now parlay his fame into a career as a right-wing rock star. It only cost him 3 black lives." Then with the hashtag white privilege. So even putting aside the slander and the mischaracterization of Kyle Rittenhouse, one, this guy Russ isn't even aware that 2 people were killed, and 2, he's not aware that everyone in this entire scenario was white. there were no black lives lost in this entire thing. There were no black lives really affected either. This just goes to show what happens when you read the media headlines, you have no idea what the case is actually about, but you just listen to what the media tells you and you regurgitate it back up. This is a perfect example. He's not the only one. There are a number of people who still somehow believe, or at least did until recently, that there were black people involved in this altercation. There were not. If you have an opinion that is based in inaccurate information, like Russ McLaughlin does, you should keep your opinion to yourself because it just shows you have no idea what you're talking about. This is ridiculous. How can you go the entire trial until the verdict without knowing no black person was shot? It astounds me. Ibram Kendi, in response to the verdict, he tweeted out an article that he had written a year in the past talking about how Republicans are defending their America, where white men can rule and brutalize without consequences. And here we have a local politician from Seattle saying that Rittenhouse being acquitted of all charges is a sickening travesty of justice and reminder that all of capitalism's institutions are complicit in this racist, murderous system that's exploitative of the vast majority. What this has to do with capitalism, I have no idea, but it's one of the buzzwords that liberals and Democrats like to throw out as if it were some sort of negative thing. For her part, Nicole Hannah-Jones saw this as an opportunity to try and plug her horrible 1619 project, where she said that in this country, you can even kill white people and get away with it if those white people are fighting for black lives. This is the legacy of 1619. So racism is so rampant in America that if you have a white guy defend himself against other white guys and kill them, that is just another example of white supremacy because of the 1619 legacy. Nina Turner, who was a state senator in Ohio, I believe, said that America doesn't have a justice system, we have an injustice system, which is a fairly common phrase by people who don't know what they're talking about. One that sees nothing wrong with cops shooting Jacob Blake in the back, and nothing wrong with killing the people protesting that shooting. Once again, a pretty big mischaracterization. Kyle Rittenhouse did not just go shooting people for no reason because they were protesting, he only shot the people who had directly assaulted him first. It's pretty important information. She says, what is the precedent this ruling sets? The precedent is that everyone has a right to self-defense. Even if you have a gun, even if you're in a place where something might happen, that doesn't mean that your right to self-defense is negated. As the prosecutor was trying to claim, saying that he was a coward for having a gun in a fistfight or some absurd nonsense. None of that makes any sense. And last but not least, we have the American Civil Liberties Union, who, if you're not familiar with, they're supposed to be a nonpartisan organization who fights for defendants and making sure that Americans have their proper civil liberties, one of which I would argue is the right to life and to defend yourself. But in response to the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict, at least the ACLU of Maryland put out this statement, saying that it's dangerous, disgusting, unacceptable white supremacy. That white supremacy is a system of oppression, and that white supremacy system of oppression is dangerous, disgusting, and unacceptable. Very clearly referencing the hashtag Rittenhouse Verdict. Now, when you quickly go through many of those responses, or even more, on social media, a lot of things stand out. First, that even though Kyle Rittenhouse was clearly found not guilty by the juror, meaning he is not a murderer, legally speaking, that doesn't really stop people from saying that he is. Second, even though Kyle Rittenhouse was white, and the 3 people he shot at were also white, it's still a very clear example somehow of white supremacy and racism and white privilege and social injustice and all of these things. Third, there are a lot of people who are very vocal in their opinion, even though they clearly have no idea about the actual facts of the case. For this case, a lot of people who are the most vocal also tend to be the least informed. They haven't been following the case, they have just been watching the news or reading headlines, and they are convinced, without a shadow of a doubt, that Kyle Rittenhouse is guilty of murder because the media has told them that is the case. Why would you need to watch the clear video evidence if you have someone on the news telling you that Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist murderer? You don't need to think for yourself. They'll just tell you what to believe. And if not the media, you can follow people like AOC, who will just propagate the exact same beliefs as the media because the Democratic Party and CNN and MSNBC, they're basically all the same. If you have more examples of how people responded to the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict in a ridiculous way, go ahead and comment it down below, because I'd like to see ones that I missed. I can't catch them all, obviously. This isn't Pokemon or anything. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.